check the edge of the knife blade. I put on the body armor of black rubber. The Afzal flippers. The graven awkward mask. The sea is not a question of power. I have to learn alone. This is the place. And I am here. The mermaid with dark hair, she's black. The merman in his armored body. We circle silently and cut the wreck. We dive into the hold. I am she. I am he. We are the half-destroyed instruments that once held to a course. The water-eaten log. The Falconess. We are, I am, you are. The cowardice or courage. The one who finds our way back to the sea. Carrying a knife, a camera, a book of myths in which lives to appear. We move together like underwater plants over and over, starting to wake up, dive back to discover you, still whispering, touch me. We go on, streaming through the slow city light, forest, ocean, stirring our body, hair. Did Friday in truth so much as hear me? I began to wonder. I ceased playing, and his eyes, which were always closed when he did his flute playing and his spinning, did not open. I blew long blasts, and still they did not so much as flutter. So now I knew that all the time I had stood there, playing to Friday's fancy, thinking he had only a concert. He had been insensible of me. And indeed, when I stepped forward in some pique and grasped at him to halt the infernal spinning, he seemed to feel my touch no more than if it had been flux. Tears came into my eyes, I am ashamed to say. All the elation of me struck that through the medium of music I might at last converse with Friday was Dutch, and bitterly I began to recognize that it might not be mere dullness that kept him shut in himself, nor the accident of the lost man's tongue, nor even an incapacity to distinguish speech from matter, but a disdain for interpretation. Watching him whirling in his dance, I had to hold back an urge to strike him and tear the wig and robes away, and thus rudely teach him he was not alone on this earth.
On a staircase dark and mean, stumbling over bodies, appears the metonymic figure of the author god, Defoe Godseer, foe to Susan, herself a foe to Friday, the latter's ripped out tongue not only signifying castration, but a metonymic excision of the female clitoris. Foe, Defoe, my foe, your foe, her foe, whose foe, meets an inscription in a tall, looping script.
Dear Mr. Foe, at last I could row no further.
Foe, echoing rich in an ironic twist of gender, tells his readers.
With a sigh, making barely a splash, I said, propofol, gripped by the current, the boat bobs away, draws out toward the realm of the waves and turn ice. Around me on the waters are the petals cast by Friday.
As he delves deeper into the dark mass of the wreck, flecked here and there with white, the author figure, the speaking subject of history, discovers, half buried in sand, the other figure outside his story.
I tug his woolly hair, into the chair at his throat. Friday, I say, and try to say, lean over him, sinking hands and knees into the ooze. What is this shit?
But this is not a praise of words. Each syllable, as it comes out, is caught and filled with water and diffused. This is a place where bodies are their own signs.
It is the home of Friday.
He turns and turns till he lies at full length, his face to my face.
The skin's tight across his bones, his lips are drawn back. I pass a fingernail across his teeth, trying to find a way in.
His mouth opens. From inside him comes a slow stream, without breath, without interruption. It flows up through his body and out upon me. It passes through the cabin, through the wreck, washing the cliffs and shores of the island. It runs northward and southward to the ends of the earth, soft and cold, dark and unending. It beats against my eyelids, against the skin of my face.
I hope this long preamble allows me to ask anew the old deconstructive question posed by Spivak regarding the possibility of subaltern speech. The title of my talk enacts, then, an impossibility. The reciting of the Spivakian question, the wreck of history into which we dive, not so much to recover the forgotten remains of her story, but to come face to face with a space beyond words, a place where bodies are their own signs, where the Muslim woman cannot speak.
This production was that in our own time, the global market, first, second, and third world alike, is the prize for those who reside in the glittering glass hours of the corporate adventurers. In our case, however, our indifference is the tool, as Medea in the ancient myth is the tool of betrayal of the colonized Colchis, who is used by the conquering Jason and then cast aside, and it is we ourselves who stand to be used up and cast aside. Los Angeles, and the media machine it contains as the most dominant element of its landscape, has exerted a peculiarly forceful colonization of the global imagination, so powerful in fact that it has begun to displace reality itself.
Media text, Los Angeles, Disport Show, 2000. The production ended according to Duncombe with the entire female cast nude, wrapped head to toe in plastic like pieces of meat, who recited a fragmentary choral testimony to the commodification of culture and the pornography of the commercial imagination.
A theatre of global politics, one that expresses the cross-cultural struggle to grapple with sweeping new economic realities, emerging technologies of incredible power, disrupted societies, fractured traditions, decaying political structures, and value systems that after centuries of acceptance are increasingly called into question.
Media text, Los Angeles, Disport Show, 2000. When I first began working on some of Mueller's texts as an actor with a company I helped to found back in the mid-1990s, company found this vehicle. I struggled with the questions implicit in Duncan's valorization of Mueller. Does Mueller's work qualify as feminist, anti-colonial, anti-globalization, transnational theatre? How has Mueller's work affected a Muslim woman, performing theorist of Pakistani alternative theatre praxis, performer observer of South Asian, Muslim, diasporic theatre work in some of the centers of New York and Paris, where the company found CFO resides? How does one's position as insider, outsider, woman, Muslim, in both first and third world contexts, inflect one's views of feminist transnational coalition possibilities of theory and praxis that would challenge this global status quo, particularly in the case of women, their labor, and representation? As far as my relationship with Mueller, it is a fairly recent one, dating from my work with the Found Vehicle, which began in 1997 with a small production from Deal Material at the New York Fringe Festival, in which I played the role of one of several media in a production by the Pakistani-born director Ibrahim Qureshi, documented again. Right away, I was alerted to the radical possibilities for change that will emerge if we really engage seriously with a vision of where our world is headed. However, as my experience with the other Medias in the cast showed me, having a multicultural, multiracial cast of strong female performers did not adequately address the problems and inherent inequities that exist across the racial and class boundaries within which gendered bodies and identities are located and operate. For example, the white Medea remains central to the textual version. She spoke, the rest of us were silent songstresses. The black Medea tried to reverse her marginality by aggressively entering the speaking moments with her colleagues. Location. Occupied an exotic register located to the other women and status quo images of sultry Indian Bollywood actresses. The power dynamic between West, East, Black, White, Brown, while certainly very engaged and engaging in this production, didn't, in my opinion, alter the politics of representation. And while Ibrahim's desire to work with Mueller's text is grounded in his vision of challenging the West's dominant paradigms of power through an engagement with its own writing text, Mueller being, after all, a Western text, with an added level of challenge coming from the fact that Mueller's high art, cerebral texts were now being stayed by a man from the peripheries. It is still far from clear that this other engagement with Mueller goes far enough in the direction of challenging the globalization from above paradigm. In other words, the traffic flow here, to put it mildly, is still about Western intellectual and material life experiences, dominating and dictating much of what passes even as avant-garde, status quo challenging, multicultural, artistic work. Although obviously this type of work must open up possibilities which are challenging to occur in ways that commercial mainstream theatre work can never do. Yet, it is instructive to note the difficulty Europe's, the West's others, encounter in trying to produce work like theirs, which is considered the prerogative of high-minded Western intellectuals by many within even the liberal, left-leaning, avant-garde circles of theatre praxis. Thus it is that our company's projects often fail to win grants from the Rockefeller or Ford Foundations, or the prestigious Arts International, who often give the superficial reason that your work is too political, and frequently what is perhaps a more insidiously liberal humanistic reason that is surmisable in such responses as, why are you doing yoga? Why not develop a more authentic aesthetic? For instance, I was told by a theatre director who read my play with some interest recently that it lacked specificity, and I was asked to make it more grounded in a concrete space, time. Perhaps, he gently suggested, something reflecting an authentic, stimulating experience. This fairly typical response encodes precisely the recuperable notion of the margin at the center of the liberal humanism that my post-colonial project seeks to displace, or rather to disperse. For, as Kalpana Seshadri puts so perspicaciously underlines,
the energy of post-colonial studies arises from its indeterminate location and failure to recoup the margin. Post-colonial studies concerns more with the analysis of the lived condition of unequal power sharing globally and the self-authorization of cultural, economic, and militaristic hegemony than with a particular historical phenomenon such as colonialism. It is this free-form aspect of post-colonial studies that makes it the target of both the right and the so-called left. But perhaps it is this shapelessness, this refusal to stay still, to define itself, that makes post-colonial studies a particularly hospitable interstice from which to work out the paradoxes of history and colony.
The paradoxes of history and colony, within which imperialist and nationalist ideologies frame the unresolved contradiction that is woman, and which these ideologies must constantly try to tame, either by marginalization or recuperation within the center. This contradictory space of woman must, for my project, remain an irrecuperable one within the reigning discourses of our times, a visible marker of the very untenability of the concept of margin, of other, of woman as other, as mother of others. It is post-9/11 work. It is the post-9/11 world, after all. But the question that I really wanted the text to ask was, who precisely are the barbarians? And why have they arrived at the shores of civilization? Whose civilization? One of the most ironic answers that my text provides to this constellation of questions is that Mueller has transformed into Mueller. It seemed Mueller himself might have appreciated that Medea, my Sufism version of Medea, that is to say, a Medea who is a mystic, a dancer at shrines of local Muslim saints, whose devotional cults are founded on un-Islamic and orthodox beliefs, hails from. Whose whore are you, Lahore? Is a question asked of her repeatedly by a chorus that is at times a gathering of macho male students of the British colonial era elite government college, another coeval space-time. At other times a naive, or perhaps not so naive, worker employed by a transnational NGO. Many of these non-governmental organizations have sprung up all over the so-called Third World as supposed benefactors of the public in the absence of responsible state actors. The irony here is that their funding sources are generally agencies like the IMF and the World Bank, who are movers and shakers of capital and the dreaded enforcers of structural adjustment programs, which render the poor and disenfranchised more impotent and debt-ridden than ever before. The NGO worker, a character who undergoes several guises in the course of the play, is a believer. So it would appear. In transnational agencies' ability to empower working class, third world women. But Mad Medea, an avatar of the fabled Scheherezade of the Arabian Nights, herself implicated within the class system of this patriarchal world order that we inhabit, is, nevertheless, not one to be fooled by such new seductions and seducers. She has seen it all before, and in turn implicates her men seducers as sources fueling, even propelling her desire for vengeance. When the first dramatic reading of my play was performed by some members of Compagnie Fin de Siècle in the fall of 2002 at the Asian American Writers Workshop in Manhattan, Mullah was substituted with Muhammad, and we chose to have a male speaker split the role of Medea with two women, myself covered in a chador and reciting some of the text in Urdu translation, and Vero, my French counterpart, emerging naked from a tubular cloth sculpture. Thus, Ibrahim, in a Palestinian cafe, kept shouting lines that our audience recognized as part of our post-9/11 discursive habitat, trying to unsuccessfully strong and barrel out. Jason's Lahore, Count Cochise, to London, to New York. Where is he? My husband, my creator.
Cover that slut. Shador's suits, buns and all, debating the fate of one who sits alone, framed in the corner on a ripped-up bed, her sister's silence damning her to whoredom in the factory of slaves.
So to recite my questions and concerns. Who am I? Where am I? What could constitute an effective interruptive feminist performance report? Reverse and challenge the imperialist, patriarchal performances of globalized power and dominance in their postmodern capitalist permutations, masquerading as a new world order. In my performative identity as Muslim, South Asian, other, woman, how far can I really go? I'm permitted to go, to jam the machinery, to interrupt business as usual. I conclude with my script's cautionary tale. For, being Eulah's faithful maid Medea, like him, I must perform my mea culpa in this transnational game we play.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Rick, back there. Thank you to the crew.
All right.
I have a mic. We're fine.
Okay, good.
You need to just pull out the chair.
Sure. Rick, can you help us just pull the chairs over? Okay. Thank you. We're just going to set up so that we can have a conversation about what we just saw, and so that you can ask questions, and so that we can talk. Okay.
Nice to meet you, Connie.
Yes, very nice to meet you. And we've done things in an opposite order this evening, but I think that's okay. So I just want to take a minute to introduce you, if that's okay. And then we'll move into talking about the performance. I'm Jill Dolan. I'm the Director of Gender and Sexuality Studies here at Princeton University, and I teach in the theater department and in the English department. I'm also here to welcome you on behalf of Michael Patton, the director of the Lewis Center, who was ill and couldn't be with us this evening. We're very pleased to have you all here, to welcome you, to have seen this wonderful performance. Let me do two things. One, I want to thank Ferris Olin and Judith Brodsky, who have organized the Fertile Crescent series of events here at Rutgers, all over Princeton, all over New Brunswick. And thank you so much for your work. I want to encourage you to fill out the evaluation forms that you'll find at the back of the theater on your way out. A lot of funding went into making this event possible, and the funding organizations need these evaluation forms to collect information so that something like this can happen again. So if I can encourage you to do that before you leave tonight, that would be really, really helpful. I also want to thank the Lewis Center staff, Rick, Sandy, Mary, everyone who really does the labor to make these events possible. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce the performer whose wonderful work we just saw. Dr. Afzal-Khan holds a PhD in English from Tufts University. She's a University Distinguished Scholar, Professor of English, and Director of the Program in Women and Gender Studies at Montclair State University here in New Jersey. She's the author of 2 books of scholarly criticism. One is called Cultural Imperialism, Genre and Ideology in the Indo-English Novel, and the other is called A Critical Stage, the Role of Secular Alternative Theater in Pakistan. She's the co-editor of a collection on post-colonial studies, and she's the editor of the best-selling anthology, Shattering the Stereotypes, which was the prop in the performance this evening and was stabbed by this very imposing knife. The book was published by Syracuse University Press in 2010 and reprinted after much controversy, which perhaps you
That's
could
the
even...
memoir.
Oh, the memoir.
Yes, this is still...
Okay, this is Syracuse University Press. I'm sorry. This was published by Interleaf Press, and her memoir, Lahore with Love, Growing Up with Girlfriends Pakistani Style, was published by Syracuse University Press, and this is the one that was reprinted after much controversy. So this one is the best-selling anthology, Shattering the Stereotypes, Muslim Women Speak Out. Dr. Afzal-Khan was also a founding member of the International Experimental Theater Collective company Femme de Siècle, which is referenced in the piece we just saw, which has performed all over the world. She's written and directed and performed plays of her own. She does solo work, which we have seen this evening, and she recently received a National Endowment for the Humanities grant to work on a documentary film on Pakistani female singers, which is called From the Medley Queen to the Muslim Madonna, a history of Pakistan through a history of its women singers. Obviously, this is a rich and incredible my role here is really just to start the conversation, to perhaps pose a few questions, and then to invite questions and comments from all of you on the performance. Maybe it would be useful to people to hear a bit about the genesis of the performance. I know you've been working on this since 2004 or before, yes?
Oh my gosh, it's been a long time.
So when did it start, why did it start, and how has it evolved over these years?
It's a good question, Jill. And thanks for posing it. I think it's a good place to begin, sort of at the beginning, and contextualize something like this, which is not an easy piece to get like right into, I think. And so it helps to know that it started as an academic essay for a journal that you now are co-editor or on the consortium of,
Yes.
for the drama review, TDR, which I mean, I started writing for it when I began my work on Pakistani theater, the Pakistani street theater as it was then known, or parallel theater, which was developing as a kind of, as an alternative to state-sponsored theater, which is of a very different order and obviously politically not the kind of theater that anybody should be worried about because it's sponsored by the state in Pakistan. So very, not political in that sense. So when in the basically the decade of the 80s, which was the decade in Pakistan of the government of the dictator General Zia-ul-Haq, during that decade, a lot of women's rights, actually minority rights, women's rights, citizen rights were really curtailed. Women sort of got the brunt of that, and I became involved at that time sort of with several street theater groups that were then forming as a kind of cultural, vanguard against that kind of control of women and their rights and religious minorities and so on. And so I wanted to do a book ultimately, which became the book that you mentioned on alternative secular theater, as I like to call it. And after that, I, sort of became more involved with sort of performance and performance studies, even though that's really not my field, in terms of what I got my PhD in. And getting into that, I realized, especially here after 9/11 and then forming that experimental theater group with another, Pakistani diasporic person, that I was interested in doing work that could speak to the issues of the day that was political in that sense, right? Which is why I gave that introduction about working with Pakistani street theater, which was responding to a very specific situation in Pakistani history at that time, and they were putting on plays that were focusing on what was happening in the country and sort of would help, sort of speak out against human rights abuses, against the abuses in the name of Islam and religion that were being perpetrated against women. And then I started living and working here as an academic, but also as a theater person involved in live theater. I wanted to combine my academic work with performance. And so this piece that you just saw came out of those various nodes of my experiences and my interests. And I wanted in this piece to, first of all, write about post 9/11 America and how it was affecting, somebody like myself who saw herself as a person who obviously, did grow up in Pakistan, of Muslim background, now living and working in the West, in the United States in particular, raising a family here, teaching and working here, but going back and forth between these two places and feeling very stifled in many ways here about, around this issue of Muslim women post 9/11. That was the only thing people wanted to ask me. Well, how do you feel about being a Muslim woman living in the West, And they had their stereotypes about the oppression that Muslim women somehow uniformly faced. And so I wrote this piece, and I wrote a play, a very peculiar play, as you can tell, which you only saw glimpses of here, which in trying to explore some of the paradoxes of being Muslim and being American and being Pakistani and being a woman, and a woman who also questions gender and sexuality and what does it even mean to be a woman, never mind a Muslim woman. So all of those things and the global circuits of power were resonating in my mind, which had brought 9/11 sort of into being in a way. And on in this piece, and that's really the genesis of it.
I wanted to share with people, is it the subtitle of the piece?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's Scheherezade Goes West, and the subtitle is Speaking Out as a Muslim Pakistani American woman/man. So one of the things I think the piece demonstrates rather beautifully is that betwixt and between, that there's no one identity that gets rested on. Would you talk some about the aesthetic choices you made in terms of embodying that there's a lot going on in the piece, that our eye is drawn to the screen, our eye is drawn to your body, which is enormously compelling, especially since we can't see, especially your face through most of it. But how did you make these choices that wind up, for me, exemplifying this kind of betwixt and betweenness that you speak about in the piece?
I mean, I think in the way that actually you've already hinted at in the question itself, the aesthetic choices have to be in a way where the talk combined with excerpts of this play that were written around trying to explain my involvement in the theater scene both here and there, and then how sort of this post 9/11 debates around identity started to form around theater and performance for me, and then the identity itself being performative, right? All of those questions dictated in some ways the choices, the aesthetic choices on stage. So for example, you've got, this is a performance, and you know, the figure walking is obviously embodying a particular kind of performative identity, that which people associate because it's repeated again and again in the media, and that's what I mean by performative, right? That's all we saw. I mean, we saw women in these burqas, and they became the emblem of our understanding here of what Muslim women were, and they were these, you know, oppressed just by that code of dress. And then on the screen, which is actually taken from a video that Ibrahim, who I was working with at the time in Company Fan de Siècle, had sort of shot and put together that what you saw on the screen. And there, of course, we had, because we were an international company, we had sort of white woman naked lying in a pool, I mean, as though there were just these are the two choices that are available to women, right? You either take off all your clothes or you're like covered head to toe, and then we shuttle between these explanations of what we're supposed to be, particularly when it came to trying to understand from the Western angle, right, what Muslim women were. And of course, the extremist forces within the Muslim world were doing exactly the same things, right? Sort of looking at either women as what we have the word fahash, right? That they embody fitna and fahashat, which is just this sort of, nudity or scantily clad women, and that's bad Western women. Or you've got the good, pure Muslim woman that is covered from head to toe. And so that's partly what those aesthetic choices were being dictated to exemplify that and to show that this is, we have to deconstruct these images and to look at a lot of stuff that's going on besides just sartorial choices.
Yeah. In that regard, I thought your choice to have the talking come from the screen, but hearing your breath to call attention to the fact of your embodiment, even though you're covered from head to toe, made the presence of the body, for me, a very palpable choice. Maybe I can ask one question about audience, and then we can open it up to the audience.
Good.
Who do you imagine as the audience for the piece, and who have you performed it for?
Yeah, that's a question that obviously I think all performers do think about to some degree, because they want the piece to be performed. And for me, it's because it didn't start out as a performance. It really started out its life as an academic essay in an academic journal meant to be read by people like you, or by students of theater, performance, post-colonialism, feminist theory, etc. That the play that got embedded and written and then sort of embedded into that essay also was working with those issues. It was a very post-structuralist, deconstructive kind of experimental avant-garde piece. So it isn't, it doesn't play well for very, I would have to say, very general audiences, although I think in some ways it has to be for general audiences, because I think, I did do it at one, I was invited to the Smithsonian several years ago. I mean, it's played in places like the Brecht Forum, and for example, in New York, and it's played at academic institutions. I mean, I just did it at Scripps and at Emory and so many places like that. And it gets certain kinds of questions that are very academic, and that's good. But when I did it at the Smithsonian, and it was done for a South Asian, primarily a South Asian audience, and they were not academics primarily, they were like, you know, I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna get tomatoes thrown at me. They were not terribly pleased. They also made them, they vocalized it, and but it was a really, for me, extremely interesting and useful. And see, the conversation that happened turned it into something very interesting. The interaction and their initial shock, I think, an initial, sort of response was, I mean, why is this woman not speaking? And why were you covered? And then when you sang, you had a mask and you wanted to see your face. Many of them were my friends, by the way, or people I knew, and they thought they were coming to listen to me sing, which is what I do a lot. And I'm very kind of, how should I put it? What's a good way? I have some friends here who can probably explain that personality of mine, which is very, I'm sort of, I'm out there in a different kind of way from here. And I'm sort of an entertainer, and they came to be entertained, and they wanted to see me all made up and wearing nice clothes, and they thought, what the hell is this? So they also felt that I was portraying Muslim women as oppressed, and they took that they sort of took the covering up as though that was what I was saying.
Yeah.
So we had to have a real conversation, but I think that they made people think, and what was interesting was that the same people who were really kind of perturbed and didn't like it, since came back a long time ago and said, well, that was, I suddenly realized, or I thought, so that's good, that's all good. And I want people to be like, and not to get it, because that's the whole point. We don't get it. I don't get it. Like, why do we assume that we have to understand? What is that will to getting it? It's very problematic to me.
And how can the process of understanding in some way exert a kind of power over something? I just wanted, this was a quote that went by in the slide, but I think it refers to what you just said. How far can I really go, or am I permitted to go, to jam the machinery, to interrupt business as usual, which I think the piece does beautifully. That's a quote from the original essay. So on that, let's invite your questions and comments and responses to the performance. Yes, please. There are mics in the aisle, but if you speak loudly so everyone can hear you.
Who wrote the essay?
Who wrote the essay?
Yes.
That's my essay.
It's your essay? Okay.
Yes, please.
I just want to say thank you for a very compelling performance.
Thank you.
As a performance artist myself, I just wanted to know how much research you
Can people hear? Yeah,
Yeah, maybe we
There's
did that.
bring that on
That's
mic.
great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I was just saying it was a very compelling performance. And as a visual performance artist myself, I just wanted to know how much of yourself do you give in your performances, like emotionally, psychologically, mentally? Because I felt quite breathless just watching you. So I'm just thinking, how much do you give, and how much time does it take to do something like that?
I give a lot. Yeah, I give a lot. I mean, my work tends to be affective. It's meant to have that affective component because that's the way I see the world. I respond in the same way. So there tend to be, my work tends to really be very intense emotionally, and that takes its toll. Also doesn't please many people, including my family.
But it's also such an important model, it seems to me, that to do the polite femininity where, there's a very surface emotional investment doesn't make the point that I think the piece is about. So I appreciate the labor that you put into the performance. Yes?
Fawzia, to be perfectly honest, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you're sitting up here talking, because when it was over, I wanted to curl up and run away. I'm sorry, I did. I it's going to take me a long time to breathe again after this. It's extraordinary. And I think we mustn't limit the meaning of understanding. I think, I don't know what it is we do, comprehend whatever, but I think the power and the evocative nature of what you do comes precisely from the layering, from the assemblage, and you know, from actually making us experience all of the worlds juxtaposed. I don't know. I just wanted to cry. I really did. I wanted to cry.
Thank you, Abina. That's really, thank you. Yeah, I mean, what can I say? It is exactly all of those things, and something that I don't think I know. What, you know, it's just, which is why I think that it's not something that, as I was saying, it can't be the issue itself, right? In the title, in the subtitle, what does that mean? I mean, that wish to consume in a very critical, analytic way, it can only take us so far, which we know and we do as academics, as scholars, but there is something else that happens, you know, what you're talking about, which I think has to do, that can only come through a particular kind of performative, you know, a performance really. That's how I understand it. So I appreciate your comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your piece. I was greatly moved, and I really felt your work, which I thought was really incredible. I haven't felt the piece for a very long time. I felt the context of your work.
I'm afraid people can't hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks. I really felt the context of your work, and I thought it was very deep and political, but very poetic, which I was greatly impressed by as well. And I was wondering if you have any workshops that you run beyond your classes that you compose the experimental theatric piece to. And I'm also wondering if you do any workshops or master classes in Pakistan, and if so, with what arts organizations. I have a friend in Pakistan now who does musical theater in Pakistan, and she does some of the master classes and workshops. And I think it would be valuable to have someone like yourself do that type of work as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. You know, given all of my obligations, professional and otherwise, I haven't really explored doing master classes and giving workshops. I mean, I've come to the field really purely intuitively in many ways, and so, you know, I haven't, but I've begun to think about it, and I've made sort of inroads into, you know, started talking to people in the School of Performance Theater Studies at my home institution, and so I actually am planning on doing starting out with a course on solo work. So they're excited, I'm excited. I have some colleagues there who are looking at me like, okay, now when did she do that? Because I'm actually based in the Department of English, not out of theater and performance. But it's something that I would like to do because I think something magical happens in that field, and I would love to work with students there and bring people who work, like you were mentioning, people like the person that you know also into that space. So I think that'll happen within a year or so. As far as Pakistan, I mean, I have another play which is not a solo piece, but has two characters and is also, you know, has stuff in it that's very, you know, it's troubling, and it's a little bit out there, and I did perform that in two places in Pakistan, one in Karachi and in the city of Karachi. So that's where I was going to do it, and the audience was actually, you know, there were people from the literary world, and it was, you know, very highly literate, well-educated audience, very left, very progressive, but a lot of the people, you know, because I don't think they're exposed to stuff like this much, And so what they saw, I could see was a little, they were, didn't know what to say, and so I think the older people in the audience weren't, I couldn't tell, but they didn't have questions and they just weren't very interested in engaging. I think they were just perhaps shocked. That's my reading. Could be wrong because I didn't get to talk to them afterwards. But there were some younger people in the audience, much younger than me, who were artists and, sort of working in music or etc. And a couple of them came up to me afterwards and said, oh, we have this very underground space off the radar in Islamabad, and you've got to come and perform this piece there. So that was very exciting for me because I did do that, and I mean, it was in somebody's basement, some young man who did a degree in engineering, but also in theater, and has gone back. I think he was in Seattle, and he's gone back, and basically this is his parents' house, but he's turned the basement into a very, this kind of, doing odd kind of pieces there, theater, and the audience was unbelievable. I mean, I was just blown away by their questions, their passionate engagement. They wanted it like this, I'm sorry I don't know your name, but what you were saying in terms of they wanted to know if I was gonna be there for any length of time, if I could do precisely what you're asking for. So I felt very encouraged because, after Karachi, I thought, oh brother, this is not the right place or the right time, but clearly there are pockets and there are different people doing different things. So it was really quite wonderful. So I hope, in other words, the long answer to your question is to be able to do more of what you're saying. But I am connected with various people in theater, music, and so on. So when I have some time, surely.
Yes, in fact.
I don't need a mic. I'm very loud.
Oh, with me.
Yes, thank you so much. It was such a courageous performance. It was obviously a personal struggle that you were willing to share with an audience of strangers, and I'm just really impressed with your strength of doing that in front of a bunch of strangers. So I just want to ask you a really simple question. What is your objective in performing this? Because obviously you've performed this with numerous amounts of different types of audiences internationally. And what is your objective in performing this piece with such different groups of audiences? Maybe there isn't an objective. Maybe it's a certain step in the right direction. But is it to plant a seed or something of that sort?
Thank you. That's one of my ex-students. That's so cool, Whitney. Thank you for coming. A theater major and a minor in women gender studies. But so the question about objectives, since it's not I didn't write it keeping that in mind necessarily, that there was a message that I wanted to get out there that was really very specific, but overall, absolutely, there was something that I was exploring in this piece, and I wouldn't, yes, to some level, obviously, it's a personal, these are personal questions that I was still face, think about, given that I work and live at the intersections of so many spaces and places, within and without academia, within and without different cultures and so on, and identity. So yeah, so that part is a personal exploration, but obviously, I don't separate the personal and the political, and so I was very, when originally I started writing this piece as an essay and as a play, and then it evolved into this whatever it was that you saw today, I wanted, if I was just to say something very kind of, broad, was to get audiences, make them uncomfortable with set or pat notions or even questions like, what questions are we asking? To think, to stop, and to make them, like audiences, become self-reflective, right? To say, so what are these questions that I'm asking about the world? Why am I asking certain things when I go up and I say, well-meaning, right? What does it feel like to be a Muslim woman? Why are Muslim women oppressed? I mean, what kind of questions are those, right? To stop, just stop. our lived experiences in a very complex and complicated world, that there is no way to pose that question. And that is why the Muslim woman cannot speak. It's not that I can't speak, but we think, which is why I was very interested in working with Spivak's notion of, when you go back to her essay, can the subaltern speak? Well, she says, no, the subaltern cannot speak. The Muslim woman cannot speak. What does that mean? Not what my friends in the Smithsonian thought, oh my God, now, you're just reifying a certain stereotype, and Muslim women can't speak. But rather that given the regimes, we've lived in a world in which there are regimes of representation, right? There are regimes of power, there are regimes that govern what can be said and how it can be said and when it can be said. And those regimes, which are really regimes of power, they limit our ability to redefine questions even. So you get into a box. That's why there were all those boxes. We are all inevitably in some kind of a box. It's very difficult to break the box. And so I'm struggling. The characters here, they're struggling against those boxes. But I don't think there are very many ways out of the box, because where is that Archimedean point? But at least let's stop and question. Question our questions.
Would you talk in that regard? One of the things that Fawzia says in the essay is that the work is often called too political by granting organizations, and that you've been urged not so subtly to perform something reflecting on authentic, quote-unquote, Pakistani Muslim woman's growing up experience. So clearly there's people pushing you toward a much less layered, much less complicated recitation of a kind of personal experience. But it seems like there was some issue with the autobiography then, too. Can you talk about both of those things?
Well, that's it. People want to bring it down to something very literal, to something that is personal in a very literal way, as opposed to personal in a larger and what we call political way of living in the world, where of course you're using personal experience. How can you not? I mean, we all do that, no matter what kind of work we do. But that's just such a small piece of it, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it immediately then you're connecting, and all these, images and thoughts and discursive realities are coming at you a mile a minute in this world that we live in, and you have to take all of those into consideration. So that notion of the self, right, as we know, post-structuralism, is a self that is not a unified self. It never was. So to talk about a self and to talk about personhood as though there are these fixed, stable identities, to me makes absolutely no sense. And when people, and then when it came to the memoir, which, this is the problem. I think people have a hard time understanding the genre of memoir. Memoir is not autobiography. It isn't. And memoir is very close to fiction. It fictionalizes personal experience. So of course, while you're working with, personal stories and experiences, they're used in very emblematic ways, to illustrate a particular slice of life that you're presenting in that memoir, which is why one person can actually write several memoirs, right? It's not a linear kind of, this is who I was and then I became this and then we went and, it's not like that. And so for someone to take umbrage at a representation that is illustrative and exemplary of some issue that I needed to sort of talk about in the history of Pakistan, I thought was very wrong-headed. But, who knows? I mean, people will do that, all kinds of things. But that's why I veer away. I mean, it's not personal in that way. It's not. And yet, of course, when I learned through this experience that may be what I think, but that's not necessarily what people think when there are certain things that jump out of them and say, oh, well, I recognize myself there, and I don't like this picture that's being painted or whatever. Yeah.
Yes, at the back.
I'm large enough to. I'm curious. I've been thinking quite a lot watching your performance, and the young lady helped me in getting to least the objective part of the question. I'm wondering, in your mind, do you think Muslim men, besides a few dictators, Muslim men are free?
Well, I think I wasn't really talking about sort of Muslim women not being free or oppressed. Really, in the way that I think your question is suggesting that that maybe I was saying, well, Muslim women are oppressed, they're not free, and why aren't I talking about Muslim men who may also not be very free? And I agree. I mean, I think that many people, including men and women all over the world, are not free. We're not free. I mean, what does that even mean? That some people are free and others are not free. We're not. We are, in some ways, we are always shaped. We are always framed. We are always contained by what I just was talking about a little while ago, which I understand as regimes of power. And they're multi-layered. I mean, so we can't say, for example, if you want to break down the person and say, okay, well, are Muslim women oppressed by Muslim men? I would have to say that's a very wrong-headed question at one level, at least at the level that I'm looking at. Are they oppressed by Islam? No. That's just too, what I'm trying to get at is the fact that may be part of something that oppresses some people, some women, even men somewhere. But in a global world order, right, which is neoliberal, which is capitalist, which is, there are all in this understanding of a certain kind of globalization, I would have to say we're all oppressed or all unfree in lots of ways, and that's something we should understand. And so therefore the question, are Muslim women oppressed or not, is honestly the wrong question. It can be posed in that way. I mean, I wouldn't answer it.
Well, then just to follow up on that, because I know as a Muslim man, I am not free to say a lot of things I like to say, either in the mosque or other places. And I am from Lahore, by the way, and I know what it takes to keep your mouth shut and mind your own business. That said, I'll go to the next question, and that is, if somebody like me who's trying to figure out what's the purpose, the question I asked earlier, and I'm saying to myself, okay, my world has to kind of now balance between the side of the Taliban, which simply doesn't make sense to me, and the side you're trying to pose, which is also not making sense to me. So what's your answer to somebody like me that, what should I think, what should I make sense out of between the Taliban extreme and your extreme?
I would not presume to tell you what to think, other than as far as where the Taliban. I mean, that obviously I would hope is whatever they stand for is not to be explained or understood. I think it's sort of, honestly, in that sense, it's just become so dangerous. I mean, we can talk about it in analytic terms. Again, looking at regimes of power and so on, but the behavioral patterns right now are so extreme and dangerous that that's just beyond the pale. As far as, certainly from my perspective, it's nothing to be said. It's not discourse that I want to enter into. And so in a way, what I'm doing here is suggesting that yes, I mean, absolutely, the mullah, that and everything that it stands in for is not a space that is conducive to any kind of rigorous, serious discussion or analysis, because it stands outside of the pale of I think of civilized discourse. And I am interested in thinking about what civilized discourse means. That's not what it means. That I'm very clear on. I can't be nuanced about that. I cannot.
One or two more questions? Yes, on the orange.
Yes, severe desire to break complexity down into the simple, which we are seeing, especially I think today in our political situation, this desire to make, are you for us? If you're not with us, you're against us. Is this American? Is it Western? Is it Judeo-Christian? Is it modern? Or is it just human?
Oh, I don't think, I think everything is ultimately a construct. I don't believe in nature in that sense. I don't think so. I just have to veer away from, well, is this human? I think that these are ways of understanding the world that, to some degree, you could point to all of those and say they come from there. I think certainly within the West, and certainly Western philosophy has always been about a binaristic kind of view of the world, us and them. And I think we've inherited that, and I think that most of these kind of world explanatory systems work within those kind of binary oppositions because they're simple and simplistic, and they help people make sense of an increasingly complex world. People want simple answers, so it's us or them, self or other, man or woman, black or white. But that's why I think it's important for us to try to work in those grayer areas and hope people are interested in talking about those, thinking about them. It's not an easy space to be in because it doesn't yield easy answers and either or answers at all.
Last question? Yes.
If you're, thank you. If you're interested in the global boxes that everybody is in, all boxes are not the same size. Some people are in very suffocating small boxes, and some people from different cultures are in a larger box. If you weren't interested in just performing the Muslim woman, why did you choose a figure who is completely closed off? She's really closed off from everything, and then show her taking off her clothes. I thought you might take all the clothes off. In fact, you might do that sometimes. But I'm wondering why you picked that characterization, because that's a very small box.
No, that's a really good question, and I think it goes back to aesthetic choices and thinking about those in connection with what are people going to walk away from thinking about this. But see, when she does take those off, that doesn't necessarily, the mask remains. The mask never comes off. She's wearing a facial mask. And certainly the gesture towards taking off her clothes is also a violent gesture, right? It's not a willing gesture. It's a tearing off. And so that can be read in multiple ways. And it can be also read, yes. We certainly saw what happened in Tahrir Square, this image of the woman who was, they tore her shirt and she was wearing exposed the bra underneath and so on. But either or, their boxes, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, these are layers that we put on, some willingly, some we think because we are choosing to do so, others that are put upon us. And even when we talk about willing choices, the question is everything, it all seems so over-determined, right? And so even those gestures of taking off the clothes are already over-determined. They fit into another kind of box, which is precisely the box that you're using to understand it, right? Because there's no other way. You are going to read it that way, and that's the problem. Whether she's got the clothes on, whether she's taking them off, whether she's putting them on, whether where the woman is lying naked in a pool. I mean, there are these boxes that are frameworks of analysis, and they don't allow us to ask questions in some other way. Ultimately, there's some layer, some mask that has to remain. It's the only way that I could think of suggesting that it's not. It can't and shouldn't be read in that way that people are going to want to read it.
Right.
Because we only have that way to read it. I don't know if that makes sense, but
I think it's a very palpable thwarting of a certain kind of desire that would ultimately reduce the performance if you gave into it. So I want to say how much I appreciated, as many people have said, the strength of what you did, the intellectual precision of what you did, the emotional acuity of what you did. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas and your aesthetics and your politics and your work with us tonight. And thank you